Hello everyone, this is Chess Peculiar Boy. Today we're going to talk about some commonly used turns in chess. You might notice that there are a lot of special turns are commonly mentioned in the chess videos or tutorials. You might know some of them, you might not know some of them. This is the purpose of this video. We are going to talk about some commonly used turns in chess. So this is the first video. I called it level 1, which means the turns we are going to talk about today are very basic. You have to know them if you want to get better at chess. So the first example we are going to look at is the pin. So the pin is what we call the pieces. It's usually a queen, bishop, or rook. It's in between your opponent's king and one piece. It doesn't necessarily has to be your opponent's piece or your own piece, but it's usually your opponent's piece in between your piece and the king. So in this position, you might notice that the bishop is attacking the king, but it's actually blocked by the knight. So what does that mean? It means that the knight can move in the next move if it's blocked to move, right? So if it's a pin, the knight can move. If we can somehow attack the knight just totally ruined. For example, in this position, it's white to move. What's a move that white can play to win the knight? So the correct move right now is f5. Why f5 is the best move is that the f5 pawn is attacking the knight on the e6. Now, can the knight goes away? Can the knight just escape from the square? The answer is no, because the knight is pinned to the king. So if it moves, the bishop is gonna take the king, right? So in this position, if you move like anywhere else, the pawn can just take the knight, and you are just up the knight. That's why the pin is so powerful, because due to the bishop, the knight is freeze there. And if you can attack the knight by the pawn or anything else, the knight is just gone. Now the next example we're going to look at is pin your opponent's pieces with your rook. In this position, you can see the queen and the king are on the same file. That's very dangerous. It's really easy to be attacked. So now in this position, if it's white to move, what's the best move for white that can win the queen? So the best move here is rook takes g5. Excellent. Why? Because you can see the queen is under attack, but the queen can't move. It can't just escape because it's pinned. The queen goes away, the rook is going to take the king. So the queen can't move. If you just move somewhere, I'm just gonna take your queen. And you can see this is knights, rooks, and the queen and the rook. So it's basically queen versus a rook. Easy win for white. So you might notice that the rook is actually protected by the knight. This is very important. If queen takes a rook, now we just take the queen. Still, easy win for white. The next example we're going to look at is what we call a fork. A fork means you use your piece to attack your opponent's 2 or more pieces. For example, in this position, it looks like I just lose a bishop, but it's okay. I'm going to lose my opponent's rook. How can I do that? Okay, so the fork usually happens with the knight because the knight moves like any L, right? So if the knight is in the center, it moves like this. Very tricky knight. And the fork usually involves a king. So that would be a check and your opponent's pieces. I will show you. In this position, the best move is actually queen takes d1. The king has no moves because the queen covers everything. So the king is forced to take the queen. Now in this position, what's the best move to fork your opponent's pieces and win the rook? Exactly, the best move here is knight f2. Notice that this is a check. So the king has to go. If he goes like anywhere, let's say king e1, try to take the knight, we just take the rook. So in this position, this is what we call the fork. The knight is attacking the king and the rook at the same time. So the fork doesn't necessarily has to be a knight move. In this position, you can move your bishop to win your opponent's pieces. How can I do that? So the best move here is actually bishop d5. Why? Because this bishop is attacking the king, which means it's a check, and it's attacking the queen at the same time. Most importantly, the bishop is protected by the knight. So if queen just take the bishop, we take back the queen. So the bishop d5 move attacks the king and the queen at the same time. This is what we call a fork. Now the next example is the pawn fork. This is very dangerous and brutal because pawn fork means you are going to lose your pieces for nothing. Because this is a pawn, you can take the pawn, but I'm going to lose some pieces. So in this position, white plays knight c3 is a deadly blunder. What can black do to win this position? So the best move here is d4. You can see the pawn is protected by everything. And the pawn, the d4 pawn, is attacking the knight and the bishop at the same time. Which means if you move your bishop, I'm going to take your knight. If you move your knight, I'm going to take your bishop. This is a deadly fork. The pawn is attacking two pieces at the same time, deadly, and losing for white. And the next one we're going to talk about is discover. Usually discover involves a check, which means we usually call that discover check. We can talk about some different discover examples in the future, but anyway, in this position, you might notice that it looks like a pin, right? The example that we looked at before is your opponent's pieces in between the king and your piece. But the example we're looking at right now is your piece in between the king and your piece, which means you can move the piece in between to check your opponent. So in this position, it's winning for white. What is a move for white that can win the queen? So the really simple one is to move the bishop to c5. So this is a check. You either just block the check or you just move the king. Either way, he's going to lose the queen. For example, he just moved his king. We can take the queen with the bishop. You check your opponent by moving the bishop, and your opponent has to react to the check. If we block with the queen, we just take. If we block with the knight, we take the queen. This is the power of the discover check. And the other move is actually bishop f6. But bishop f6 is actually not as good as we've imagined because he can block with the knight. If we just check and it goes somewhere, and your opponent somehow escape because we can't take the queen. The queen can go to anywhere. There's no pieces can attack. So the very straightforward moves is actually just bishop c5 and win the queen, guaranteed. And there are a really famous example that involves a discover check. This is what we call the smother mate. And there is a really famous example, or I should say infamous example, that involves a discover check. So in this position, it's actually mate in 3, which means you're going to move the pieces 3 times to deliver checkmate. What's the move here? So we just look at some of the example of pinned and discover. You might notice that the queen is attacking the king and the knight is in between. If it's white to move, we can move the knight to somewhere to deliver a check. Okay, so in this position, you have to know this pattern. If you master this kind of pattern, this might be the first queen sacrifice game you've ever played. Alright, so the best move is actually knight a6 check. This is what we call a double check because the queen is checking the king and the knight is also checking the king. So the king has no moves, has to go to the a8 square. Now, in this position, what's the move here? If you've never seen this before, you can try to find the pattern here. The best move here is actually queen d8 check. So the queen is guarded by the knight, so the king can't take, and the king has no moves, which means the rook is forced to take the queen. In this position, mating 1, what's the move? Knight c7 check. So the king has no squares to go to, and is checked by the knight at the same time. This is what we call smother mate. Now, the very similar example of discover check, but this one is a little bit different. You might notice that this is not a queen, so we have no smother mate. This is not smother mate anymore. But very, very similar idea. You are going to use your pieces to discover check your opponent and win your opponent's pieces. What's the move here? So there are not only one answer, there are actually 2 answers, but both moves are very good. So the best move here is actually knight takes e6 check. You can't take the knight because it's check, and the king has to move, or you can block with the rook. It's also a move, I mean. But if your opponent just move your king to a8, you might notice that he loses queen. So this is actually really powerful that you're using the discover check to win your opponent's pieces. You move your piece to clear the road for the bishop to deliver a check. Now the king moves and you can take the queen. Powerful, powerful, man. So the other answer is actually knight b5. This is the same thing. You're attacking the queen and checking the king at the same time. King moves anywhere, you just take the queen. Easy peasy. And the discover doesn't necessarily have to be a check. In this position, it's white to move, and you are going to do the same thing. Your piece is in between your opponent's important piece, as is usually the queen, and your piece. So in this position, what's the move for white to win the pieces? So the best move here is actually bishop takes f5. You can't take the bishop because the rook is attacking the queen. So if queen goes anywhere, we just move our bishop out of danger. So now, after bishop e4, we are up another piece right now. So this is the same idea. You remove your piece to clear the road for your rook to attack the queen. Now queen goes anywhere, we move our bishop from the danger, and we're safe. Power of discover. So today we actually look at 3 examples. We have pin, we have discover, we have fork. There are all very useful tricks, or I say turns, in chess. So next time, if you see that similar patterns, you can utilize them to win your opponent's pieces or even win the whole game. Thank you guys for watching. I'm going to make the part 2 very soon. See you guys next video. Goodbye.